Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on food crisis. Uh, and this is very important session for our uh, World Talent Economy Forum because we are focusing on emerging economy, and right now price inflation create a lot of problem. Uh, so we have our expert panelist, Madam Ali Rice and Professor David J. Kelly. First, I would like to give chance, Madam Ali Rice.
Okay. Well, for us, just in the UK, the war in Ukraine has had a knock-on effect on energy prices and in turn on food prices as well. So even in the West, there's been a massive impact. So, and I understand that kind of Russia not only supplied a lot of energy to the UK, but they also provided a lot of fertilizers too, which has a knock-on effect on agriculture too. And I also think with with extreme weather conditions as well, because we've definitely had, every year for the last 10 years, I think we've had the hottest temperature on record in the UK. So I think and food production and food distribution is kind of hitting. Even now, actually, there's a restriction on how much fruit and vegetables we can get in the supermarkets because we just haven't got the same amount of both that we had or we generally have. So there's restrictions on how much people can buy. And also the cost of living crisis, particularly during the winter months, means in the UK, some people have to choose between whether they heat or eat, whether they heat their homes or eat. So I think the thing is, as you know, if Western cultures, some people have to rely on food banks to have enough food for their families. If that's impacting the Western world, it must be really tough, in other countries that are much harder hit generally. So, so I think there's massive kind of solutions and ways forward that we need to find to make things more sustainable.
Thank you. Professor David J. Kelly, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yes. What your observation on food crisis? What do you think? What will happen next 1 to 3 years?
Well, in the short term, I think there's going to be a lot of inflation, and there might be supply chain issues and things like that that'll restrict distribution of certain kinds of foods and commodities and that sort of thing. I think that how bad a crisis that shows up really depends on the actions we take now. And I'm not sure, we're going to have like at least in North America, huge mass starvation in the immediate future. But, globally, it's an ongoing problem. And really the solution will come down to our actions and the sustainability of those solutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have Dr. Talib Rafael. I think he has experience. Hello, Dr. Talib. Can you hear me?
Second here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Talib, we are discussing on food crisis. Yes. Dr. Talib, we are discussing on food crisis. So you have experience to run UNWTO. So what do you think? What will happen for price inflations and beside that this food crisis? What will be the picture of next 2 to 3 years?
Okay, well, with food crisis, you must be very careful about what you do. Step by step. For example, you must provide, especially small farmers, to do something about their products.
Dr. Talib?
Ability to support them. You can without small, medium-sized SMEs in agriculture. Secondly, you must avoid the pests and the other diseases that can hit your crops. That's a very important thing, because crops can be easily become vulnerable by pests and like your farming product. Third thing is you must provide for a better infrastructure, for irrigation, and for improving the quality of the agricultural product. Fourth and more is the fact that you need to improve the ability of not creating conflicts. You know, like the conflict in Ukraine now, it has created so much food crisis everywhere. Because Ukraine, we discovered all of a sudden after the invasion of Ukraine, it used to provide the world with the crops, with the we took it elsewhere. Okay. Okay. Now what is needed is to avoid conflict, because conflicts can very easily create more food crisis. And averting these food crises can only be done through averting conflicts. We in the developing world cannot live with these crises, especially countries in Africa and the Middle East and Southeast Asia, South Asia also. These are countries that are dependent so much on the West to provide them with the food, to provide them with the technology, the know-how, or what I talked about before. So it's important that we do not forget this time, because crisis can extend itself so many times, like the crisis in Ukraine. Nobody expected it to last this long, but it is now, and many people are not getting anything out of Ukraine now. That's the point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Madam Ali Rice, there are many factors actually in contributing to today's food security crisis.
Yeah.
Climate change is one of the important aspects. What do you think? Climate change has any impact? Beside that, Dr. Talib Rafael discuss on this where how we can solve this critical problem.
Yeah, well, because definitely the climate obviously has an impact, and obviously with the floods in Pakistan last year, that crops that people rely on can be completely wiped out if they have them severe weather conditions. And in Europe and America as well, there was kind of massive droughts as well, which also had a kind of an impact on crops and yields as well. So I think. So I think maybe we know, because definitely in the UK and in Europe there's huge problems with food waste as well. So a third of the food that we produce is thrown away. So and I think in China the same thing happens actually. I think that country has got more food waste than any other. So I think kind of actually it's kind of focusing on and being conscious about what we do with our food so we utilize it. And I remember years and years ago there were pictures of kind of obese people in the West that had too much food and kind of just demonstrated the consumerism and the greed that we find in the West. And then there was African children that were, had malnutrition and didn't get enough food in a day. So I think the thing is, the food distribution and the way the world works needs to be kind of checked out. And so I just think we need to have less and look at more quality food, but kind of share what's available. And and the research that I did actually, they were saying that at the moment there's only 15 grains that the whole world uses, but there's something like 5,000 edible plants. So I think looking at other ways of eating as well. And definitely over here, there's a push here to have much more plant-based food. So essentially, I think a cow environmentally has 30% more impact than eating chicken or pork. And obviously, if you have plants, then there's even less kind of there's less taken away from the environment. And obviously, there's grazing as well takes away biodiversity as well. So I think the implications of having meat also has a massive ramifications. So I think kind of eating less, so making sure that there's less waste, and also being conscious of what we eat, so that it's sustainable is something. And also kind of, because we live really close to Evesham, which used to be one of the biggest productions. It was the main kind of garden of England for producing crops, and I think locally sourcing things as well. So the things that we haven't come across the world to be on our plates. So I think it's kind of looking at the economics of things, but making sure that we're supporting local businesses as well, so that it's kind of like a circular economy within the places we live as well. So I think there's so I think we don't tend to necessarily look where our things. I know for sure I had a stir fry the other day, and the only stir fry that was available to me came from Kenya. And it just seems a nonsense that, fresh food that you put in a stir fry would be all the way from Africa. But there is the other side of it is obviously it's kind of we're providing kind of, they're providing food for us and we're supposedly paying for them. So it's obviously some crops don't grow here because of the climate and others do. So I think I just think the way that we do things and the production of food and distribution needs to, so the systems need to change so it's much more sustainable.
Professor David J. Kelly, you know that right now we have a lot of challenge, especially inflation create a lot of problem. Example, in emerging economy, we have many low-income people, but food price increasing rapidly because of war, because of climate challenge. What type of solution we have in your mind, and specifically if you have any kind of help for emerging economy from your side, you can share with our audience, because we are seriously concerning about this worldwide food crisis.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that entirely. That seems like a lot of different questions there kind of rolled up together. I think, though, the biggest problem to our food shortage, but it also would help with the environment and so forth, is these kinds of sustainable agriculture, especially like permaculture and hydroponics or aquaponics, actually. I've actually done quite a bit of research in that area. I mean, I still have these different vivariums behind me, which you can mostly just see from the glow. But where my interest is in closed system stability in an biological environment. But I think, when you start talking about the use of AI and all of the advanced technology, we could grow stuff so much more efficiently and do it locally. And the thing is, with aquaponics, it doesn't even require really that advanced. It doesn't require a bunch of advanced technology either. You can do it just fine without AI and sensors and all this mumbo jumbo. And especially if you start looking at some of the permaculture stuff, like there's a couple of places in India where they've done just an amazing job of turning these completely trashed environments back into sustainable ecosystems that I've been particularly impressed with, and that gets more into the permaculture thing, which is kind of more working with the environment than a closed, sustainable system like aquaponics, which again is something that could be done relatively cheaply. Now, I think wider adoption of those kinds of technologies and those kinds of approaches to locally sourcing food, providing more food in a sustainable way that's not going to damage our environment, I think is where the answer is. As to whether us as a civilization go there, do that, I mean, there's just so many different variables, and you see bits and stuff here and there and that sort of thing. But at the global scale, we need it to ensure that no one on planet Earth starves. I'm just not sure humanity's getting the job done all the way, at least not yet.
Yeah. Dr. Talib Rafael,
Well,
right now, I have a question for you, Dr. Talib. I have a question for you, Dr. Talib. Right now, what we are observing in between Ukraine and Russia, it creates actually big impact around the world. Do you believe, do you think our global political system collapse?
well, the global political system is to blame for much of what we're living in today, for sure. Because the global political system does not care much about starving people in Africa, or in the Middle East, or in South Asia, or Southeast Asia. They don't care about this. What they care about is how they can increase their own profits, their own assets, so to speak. So, what we talked about earlier, the prevention of this crisis, is something that has to do all with the politics of the developed world, really, because they are now providing the world with more crises, like the one in Ukraine, for example. I talked about it earlier. But I think David Jekyll mentioned something very important, which is the fact that humanity doesn't care much about people that are starving to death. Now, people are hungry. People are hungry now, many parts of the world. And it's something that you have to address, whether we like it or not. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your view about worldwide food crisis?
Well, there's definitely a worldwide food crisis, and it's being aggravated by all the global crisis that we're in right now as well. What Jason had said in public comments about the fertilizer inputs and things is very much true. But I agree with what Dr. Sharif had just said, is that the crisis around food has failed to reach the critical point in many of the developed nations because of some of the access they have to food. But we're really ramping into a time where the impacts of the lack of fertilizer, the impact of the shifting inventories of crops that are in production. We've seen that in Ukraine, they were the leaders, or among the top leaders, of several of the different agricultural crises. The impacts of global change with the changing water, the amount of storms, and the amount of droughts and floods has dramatically changed how we see it. I can tell you, here in Austin, I saw it where we had ice on all of our trees last week, destroying a number of them. Yet this week, those same trees are budding new plants on them. And we have another cold front coming that's going to impact those. So that is changing how we are here. And a number of early plantings have been destroyed because of it. And we're going to see those type of changes globally, I believe, as we go. The other thing is, I look at this topic that is really interesting is, you know, if I look back earlier this year with part of what WFP, the World Food Program, put out, that there's a record 349 million people in 79 countries are facing acute food insecurity. And that is actually a rise of 200 million people compared to pre-COVID. So it's not just the wars, it's not just the geopolitical impacts, it's actually some of the impacts from COVID and how that disrupted the logistics, how that disrupted the whole ecosystems. And the cost of delivering food today is at an all-time high because of all those changes, the shortage of labor, the shortage of low-cost labor. Well, conflict is still the biggest driver of hunger. Climate is as well, and we're seeing that. And the cost of even natural gas and other that are used to help produce fertilizer, ammonia, and we're seeing particularly the production of rice, soybean, and wheat. They're all falling dramatically last year. And those are the staples for so many places in this food crisis. And we just really need to come together and understand the nuances of it. Some of it might be to go into regions of the world which traditionally had not been producing a lot of food and set up microenvironments there. Just like we talk about mini grids and microgrids in the energy domain, we might need to do some of the same type of things in the food domain. The hydroponics that David was talking about, those are very important too. We've seen how those can grow a whole lot of food in a very compressed area, particularly with vertical stacking in places where even the environment isn't compatible with traditional farming. But even the water use has become real difficult. I can tell you some of the rice we grow here in Texas was not happening last year because of water shortages. And we now have some water backups that I think we'll get a crop out this year. But those type of cyclical actions are going to continue to increase, I believe, with what we see happening around the world, Sharif.
Thank you, Madam Ali Rice.
Yeah, so the other thing that I looked at actually is eating less meat and also meatless meats that they're producing as well. So I think, but I think there's a natural resistance to kind of technologies and genetically modified produced food. But I think the thing is that sometimes that's the only solution in some areas. So I think there's the use of technology and rethinking. So definitely here they were pushing people to eat kind of mealworms and kind of finding alternative protein sources. So and I guess in other places I think they're much more I think they're much more open to what they eat, but definitely in the UK I think it's taken us like decades to be open to kind of spicy food, and our palates definitely change. But I definitely think as the Western world's kind of there's a kind of conformity and traditionalism to what we eat that we probably should. So I think kind of looking at alternative sources of food as well that are within the natural environment. So I think it really does matter that we kind of make sure that we're kind of utilising our natural resources around us. And where is it? There's lots of people that forage for food, in the UK. So I think, that kind of and it seems kind of an old tradition, that's kind of a long gone. But I think lots of people that I know that are healthy know how to find, salad leaves and things like that. So I think kind of actually having an informed kind of education of what's kind of in the wild as well, and just kind of market gardens and maybe community, you know, this area is really well known for orchards as well. So kind of community orchards, so food can be shared and grown. There's definitely people that I know that own orchards. Most of those apples go to waste and just rot on the ground. So I think if more community orchards and areas were developed, that would be, you know, that would be a way forward as well. So I think, but the longer term view, you know, there definitely needs to be a much more conscious way of doing things so that there isn't waste. And the food that is, you know, is available is given to people that need it. So yes, definitely over here we have use by date. So once the use by date's gone, like the local shop in our village just throws all the food away, and that food's perfectly usable still. So I think it's just a recommendation. So I think there needs to be some kind of connection with all the dots. So people that, you know, otherwise would go to food banks have. Or there's, you know, that people they won't sell wonky vegetables. They only sell vegetables that are perfect. And there's lots of other food that's just left in the fields because it's not, you know. So I think that, you know, so I think we just need to be more open to what's edible instead of looking at something that's supposed to look perfect. So, and definitely when we were in the EU, there was some crazy, you know, there was some measurement of what a banana was supposed to be. So there were huge waste mountains of bananas that didn't fit the category that an EU banana should have. So I think that's just crazy. So yeah, I just think we need to be more resourceful and kind of access what's there and share it within the, you know, the local communities as well.
Thank you. Professor David Jekali. So David?
I'm here.
Yes. From different perspectives, specifically when we discuss about this present war and many problems we are observing, we need a good leader. I think we have leadership problem. So people just run behind money, and we are creating a lot of problem. And example, now right now I'm in Bangladesh. Next month I will be in India. We are observing millions of problem with this food crisis, water related problem, and many more things. How we can solve this leadership problem?
Well, I don't know why I get all the hard questions.
Because I like you so much.
That's, you know, how to grow up new leaders is really a hard problem. I know, you know, one of my tools with my children was things like the BSA scouting program, but nowadays I'm not even sure that is that effective. I think teaching leadership obviously is something that needs to be done because as some of the leaders over here, there's too much corruption and that's why I tend to favor things that sort of undermine the government somewhat. Not directly. I'm not saying revolutions or anything, but like cryptocurrencies and things like that lower the amount of power, because no matter what, when you centralize power and you have humans, you're going to have corruption. It's inevitable with the state of humanity nowadays, with very, very few exceptions, if any. And you know, teaching people, I think you'll see better leadership. So setting how to teach leadership aside, I think we'll see better leadership the more we have collective decision making that actually works. You know, I'm not like one of the problems with like communism, for example, is again, you centralize decision making as opposed to having it distributed through the community where people who are right there make the best decisions for their business or their, you know, whatever it is. But when we can enable those people to make those decisions with the power of of the collective intelligence of society, then you start to have a meaningful way of breaking out of the kind of cycle of corruption that we have going on. Now, that said, in terms of teaching leadership, I've seen a lot of programs with youth, and I think probably the best programs for teaching leadership is actually to put children in projects and organizations where they get to be leaders, but it's in a safe space where they can be guided. There's this concept of leadership from behind, where you're not leading the group as an adult advisor, but you're helping the children lead themselves in a way. And I think giving kids access to those kinds of programs that do that sort of thing is probably the best technique I've seen for actually teaching children in any case.
Dr. Talib, you are a politician. Dr. Talib, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry. Okay, it's better now. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I want to comment on what David Jackelis just talked about, which is how to make leaders. It's a question you ask. Now, you don't make leaders out of a vacuum. You don't make leaders in places that you do not want leaders to be strong enough and fight the corruption. When we make the leaders now, leaders are made by politics and politicians all over the world. And they are also trying to divert this world into their own pockets, unfortunately. So it's important that we keep that in mind when we address any problem. It's important also to look at leadership and education, because leadership can be part of not being non-educated also. But I'm not sure about the issue of having children go to leadership positions like that. I don't think it's a problem of what are the qualities of the leader. The problems are what can a leader do now in the world of today. The leaders are very limited in their access to power and in their access to doing things. It's important to keep that in mind also. So going back to the food problem, I think Professor David Smith mentioned something about rice and wheat. Rice and wheat are very important because rice is the main food item when it comes to Asia, East Asia and South Asia, East Asia particularly. And wheat is the problem. It's the major issue of food here in our part of the world, in Middle East and Africa. I would say that. So these are two very important items. These items cannot be played with. Because if you play with that, when we talk about somebody poor here, we say he doesn't have bread in his plate today. Bread is very important because wheat is very important. And the wheat used to come to us from Ukraine. We didn't know that. We didn't know that we stopped producing our own wheat. We were the bread basket of the world during the days of the Romans. Nowadays, we don't do anything like this. We have to import our food from outside, for our wheat particularly. But now, how do you go about that? You go about that by creating a political system. It is not like the political system that we have now, which is based on corruption. Corruption in these poor countries, corruption in big countries as well. It's corruption that manifests itself everywhere. That's what's the problem. And leadership cannot have a leader that is still corrupt. A leadership must be free of corruption. So how can we train people to become leaders if they don't have the ethics and the motivation to become leaders. I think the motivation to become a leader is based on the fact that some leaders are more aware and more conscious of their society, and they need to dedicate themselves to society rather than just dedicate themselves to becoming richer and richer every day. Fortunately, that's the case now. Thank you very much, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Smith. Can we unmute, please?
Sorry. I have to echo what I just heard. When I've seen programs I've been involved with in places like Haiti, other countries, the amount of money that actually gets spent on solving a problem is often only 40% of the money allocated, and the rest goes other places in corruption. And that is a challenge that we need to address and understand and think about ways to solve that. It might be through enhanced public-private partnerships. It might be through different ways of releasing money directly to third parties and things that bypasses it. But that is a very important consideration. And Sharif, the question you asked about leadership is very difficult to train and grow leaders, because so much of being a good leader is how you work with other people, how you look at solving problems, how you look at how to deconstruct and then reconstruct solutions. Those are all important considerations, and it's hard to teach, particularly if you have strong cultural biases, and particularly around the area of the worldwide food supply. There's tremendous cultural biases everywhere. I was having a discussion last night of some of the meals I've had in the Middle East and in Asia, and the people I was having dinner with said, well, I would never eat any of those foods, yet they're acceptable there. By the same token, we see that everywhere, but it's the biggest crisis we're facing right now is in the basic food stocks. And how can we get those basic elements go? How do we get labor that can work with those areas? Robotics and things are helping a lot, but particularly in the developing parts of the world, they're just not economically feasible there. Also, how do we look at fixing the logistics problems? You know, there's shortages of ships to transport it, of truckers to move it globally. How can we do that in a time when the financial institutions are not stable? And many of our financial institutions are not stable today. So how can we work around that? Also, there's a rural resilience initiative, and it's an effort to try to protect and educate and equip almost 500,000 farming families from climate hazards in developing nations such as Bangladesh, El Salvador, Fiji, Kenya, and others like that. And that's a program that's trying to really go right down to the people who are doing the work. And in the developing nations and in the developed nations, we're looking at what can we do to provide safety nets to people around food, and how can we do that? But that type of assistance is not enough. There needs to be a coordinated effort across governments, financial institutions, the private sectors, the non-government organizations, and others to mitigate a even more severe crisis we see coming up. Good governance, good leadership is the golden thread that holds society together. And we need to look at how it works. We also need to look at how can we end conflict, not just in places like Ukraine, but in Yemen, Ethiopia, South Sudan, totally throughout the Middle East, even some in South America. How can we go and end those conflicts that are impacting our ability to meet the needs and to help alleviate the worldwide food crisis? Complex problems again. Sharif, you do an excellent job of surfacing very complex problems for us to talk to, where the solution paths are not simple solution paths, but they're complex solution paths which involve many stakeholders. And understanding the requirements of those many stakeholders is always a challenge in environments like this. And it's that balancing act. If there was a simple solution, we wouldn't have the crisis. And that is really goes to say with what we're doing today. And it's also one of education. Ali Rice said that so much food is wasted, and I agree with her. You know, I see that all the time. And even the eat by dates are ones that we need to understand. Those are my comments. Since Sharif's gone, I guess it's to you, Ali.
Yeah, okay, because I think change needs to start at home first. So I think the thing is that kind of being conscious about what we do in our own homes has kind of a knock-on effect to everything else. And for me, I think leadership probably comes from somebody that's kind of driven to make a difference, and whatever path they follow, they suddenly realize they can influence and impact something and find solutions to problems that they see in the world. And that might be somebody that lives in Africa, or somebody, you know, an entrepreneur that lives here. So I think leadership isn't, you know, my nephew's at Oxford University, and there he said that there's kind of individual people that he knows are being kind of groomed to be, you know, the leaders of tomorrow in government. But he also says that those people that he realizes, you know, they're not necessarily the people that you want to be in leadership. And I think there's a huge, you know, there's a huge difference between somebody, you know, that's had a private education in the UK and somebody that's much more grounded and had a state education and understands the life and the grassroots experience of people. You know, it's in all kind of social areas. And, you know, so I think the thing is that there needs to be an understanding kind of culturally within country, but within county as well. You know, that like the local kind of understanding of what, you know, in a rural areas, there's completely different problems to, you know, a city. So I think the thing is that there needs to be kind of a localized and collective decision on what happens. But obviously in rural areas, you've got access to food and it's grown kind of close by. So I think the thing is that the distribution to cities, you know, comes from, if it's within country, you know, from those rural areas as well. So I think it kind of needs to be joined up thinking, really. But there's, you know, it's still that kind of level of consciousness, because we don't, so I think just taking things for granted, you know, since 2020, I think we've all discovered that, you know, prior to COVID, the systems in place weren't sustainable, and COVID's always going to be given, you know, the excuse as to why the health system's failing or the food system, but there's the education system as well. But those systems weren't sustainable anyway, and neither was the financial system. So essentially, you know, so I think COVID just kind of just brought to surface what was already kind of relevant, you know, so the way that we kind of manage the natural areas in the world, you know, the biodiversity, and, you know, a healthy world depends on a healthy natural planet. So, and I think the thing is that we're probably being pushed to change our practices so we do things differently, so it is sustainable. And I think that's where, you know, and I think, you know, the big corporations and all the things, so what we buy and as consumers makes a difference to, you know, so I think those conscious decisions need to start, you know, from within and then kind of work outwards. And yeah, so I think it is tricky and it's really complicated, but, you know, somewhere or another there's going to be a solution. because we need to do things differently.
Thank you. Professor David Jekali, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, I think someone made the comment about where change needs to start at home, and I actually agree with that. Is we need to start, making changes in our lives, or whether it's with food or related to changing cultural norms or other things that affect our ability to make decisions that allow us to do things that are sustainable and so forth. I think leadership is less of an issue than whether we're doing changes in our own life.
Thank you. Professor Talib Raphael, what's your concluding remarks?
I agree with that. I agree with Ali and David. We should start at home. Each one of us has to start with his own self. And home is where you live. Home is a very important factor here. And I think that leaders come out of homes. They come to, as David Smith said, they come to solve problems. They're natural. And they must be clean as such. Because if they're corrupt in any way, that won't work. And people know that. People are not stupid. People know exactly what the leaders are and who's a good leader and who's not. The only thing is they don't have much to say about it, unfortunately, in our parts of the world. But in many parts of the world, that's a fact also. So I think that the issue of food is a very important issue. It's one of the basic rights of people to be fed, to have a job, to be able to afford the money, to afford the food that's being put on the table. Just like education and health, transportation are essentials to human life. I think food is a very essential thing, because without food we won't be living, won't be sustaining life on Earth. Sustainability is not just about the environment. Sustainability is about sustaining life on Earth for future generations to do something about it. If we're going to starve to death, then there is no future. And that's what worries me a lot about the food situation in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks?
Very important topic as always. This is a topic which is a global topic. It affects developed and developing nations. It affects the poor inversely to the better off in the world. It's one that technology can help with, but it's one where human capital is still the greatest cost factor in producing food. Shipping is a very big one, which is having challenges right now in producing raw materials such as the fertilizer, which is commented on earlier today. There is even a shortage of seeds to plant with, and we need to go ahead and address the shortage of seeds. If we do not do that, our next generation crops after the current one are going to be in jeopardy. And it's one of culture again. We need to look at the ability to understand the culture and translate that against all these other problems. I would love if we could just have a magic wand and wave it, but the fact is that there's so many factors in it that we are now in a perfect storm for the whole food system right now. And really, all the countries of the world right now are beginning to look at a food crisis. And we see that happening all over. And we need to look at what can we do to address the food crisis? How do we avert it? And how do we help prices become affordable again? Because today prices have become unaffordable. And I know here in Austin, I was looking at a study earlier where our price of food has gone up here over 200% in the last year. And that's not sustainable for a lot of families. So it is a complex problem. And Sharif, thank you for bringing this to the attention of your audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Madam Ali Rice, Professor David J. Kelly, and Professor Dr. Talib Rafael for joining today's sessions. If anyone asks me what you learned from last 745 episodes of World Talent Economy Forum, and you know that beside this online open dialogue, we engage with grassroots level people. In Bangladesh and India, we are engaging with 5 different cities, you can say villages, with 10 million people. I only learned one thing about leadership. Actually, leadership is not about me. Leadership is not about you. Leadership, actually, investment on other people, investment on the people's growth. That is called real leaderships. So I think this is the lackings around the world. Those who are leaders, they are not investing on others. They only thinking about themselves. So we have to solve this problem. If we can solve this problem, I think our food crisis, our energy crisis, our water crisis, our technology crisis, our science-oriented problem, everything will be solved. But definitely we need leaders. Hopefully, with our action, as we are engaging with millions of people from the youth, we can develop new generations, and this generation can help us to develop new ecosystem for their society. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. Those who want to invest on other people, those who want to be real leaders, you can join in World Talent Economy Forum, and you can come to Bangladesh and India and join our real projects. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you, Dr. Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Matt.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, bye, bye,
Bye.
bye.